Hello. Thanks for coming out tonight. John, can you still hear me? All right.
Yep, loud and clear.
All right. So tonight we're going to talk about Cypress automated testing, kind of how to set it up, and we'll set up some basic examples of setting up end-to-end tests on either a local application or any other web app, and then we'll dive into some examples of data setup and how to do that. We'll be using a Ruby on Rails app, but a lot of these concepts will apply to other frameworks as well. So if you're doing, whether you're doing front end with JavaScript or any other Elixir, PHP, whatever. Through the front end, and then go through some more flexible solutions around that, and then show a library called Cypress on Rails that's available for, say, that kind of giving you an out-of-the-box solution for some common things you'll do. So Cypress is an end-to-end testing framework. It's written in JavaScript. You can use end-to-end frameworks for integration testing. You're basically mimicking user interactions with the site. We'll be covering end-to-end testing tonight, but Cypress also allows you to test components, especially if you're doing things in React or Angular. You can give it just a component and test it that way as well. So for our demo, we'll test the Ruby on Rails app. This app is pretty much your standard scaffolded post application from the Rails guide. I added some user authentication as well as the ability to post comments on the site. And then ultimately our tests will have the ability to fill out forms and assert page content. So switch over to my terminal real quick. First thing I'm going to do is just go over the, trying to think out what order I want to do this in. Yeah, first we'll just go over the basic Rails app we have here. So, server. So, may move this thing every now and then. Let me know if this is blocking. So post application, by default, you can't do anything other than sign in and sign up. So sign up as a test user real quick. Register. Takes us to a posts index page. We don't have any posts yet, so we come here and create one. That takes us to a show page with our name, title, and content, as well as author, which is my current user. Move this up for a second. I can leave a comment. I can leave multiple comments. I can delete a comment. I can come back and look at it from the index. I can also view and delete. That's pretty much what we'll be working with. So for Cypress, let's just look at the documentation page real quick for this. Just look at their main site, Cypress.io. They have a fun little video here on the home page, which I thought it was autoplayed, maybe not. But basically shows the UI. Getting started, pretty simple. You can just init a new Node app, install Cypress, and initially that's all you have to do. There's some config files you'll inevitably add later, but really it's just npm install, and then to run it, should be down here somewhere. Cypress open. So running Cypress, you have Cypress open, which is your headful experience. That's opening up an actual browser window. You can watch it play through the tests. There's also Cypress run, which looks to use a headless browser. So I'm going to close this out. I'm going to actually restart the app in the test environment. I'll use the test database, and then I have a Cypress folder with a Cypress app pre-set up.
What does localhost look like with the test environment running?
What does it look like? It should look the same.
There's no data.
There's not going to be any data in it right now.
Okay.
I'm just using the test environment so it doesn't conflict with my development database. So we'll do npm run. Actually, no, run Cypress. npm Cypress open.
npx.
Cypress open. So first thing you get is a dialog asking if you wanted to use end-to-end testing or component testing. We'll do component testing. Run it in Firefox.
Firefox.
And he's running Firefox.
I am running Firefox. And then the first thing we'll look at is this authentication example I put together. I can just go in there and delete that. So the Cypress. This is something we'll be making later.
Okay. Hey.
So what we just did is we watched it. It was lightning fast, but it just signed up as a new user. So it visited sign up, filled out the form. Actually, it submitted it empty first. You can click on all these steps and see, what happened at each step. So tried to submit an empty form, came back with error saying, hey, you need an email and password. Filled in all the data, hit submit. Took us back to the post page. Then we signed out and then went to the sign in and sign in as the same user again. So look at the code. It's in the screen sharing. Pause. Okay. So you have describe contexts, and then you have a context, which is your test. You're saying that this is the name of this test is signs up and signs in. You have your visit for visiting URLs. You have get. You can give it like HTML IDs, classes.
Like a CSS selector.
CSS selector, yeah. So this is pretty common. Everything that's common I found is to use a data attribute called test ID. So if you have something you're targeting in a test, but you don't have any other identifiers you want to use within your app, it's common to put a
Did
test
you
ID.
manually do this, or did you use some extension?
I manually wrote this.
Okay.
Yeah.
I like to use an extension called Cypress Recorder.
Cypress
It
Recorder.
does everything for you.
Does it update does it actually put tags on your HTML that you're targeting? So you
So like you're saying, you did like type equals submit, or test ID. Like I could get all of the tests written without adding any test IDs.
Okay.
The extension's smart enough to create some really convoluted, DOM manipulation, and so it writes it all as text, and you can just kind of copy it and paste it in here.
You don't want
Yeah, of course you don't want it.
complicated
Of course you don't want
DOM
it, and you
manipulation.
can write test IDs if you want.
It's actually, when you're clicking on something through an
If you
interface,
have the test ID, it'll use the test ID. If you don't have the test ID, it'll come up with something more convoluted, but it'll still work.
is it
The point
adding
is
test
that-
IDs to your markup in the process?
No.
Or is it
No, it's probably just
making
writing
a
the
select?
No, it's looking at the website that's
literal
served.
DOM syntax.
Got it.
It's
So the
looking at the
select-
website that's
Okay.
served, and you just hit record.
No, I
you
think
do
the
all
way
your
like
interactions.
Ryan's doing it is just more reliable, because like if you rely on something.
Well, it's best practice.
It's
So you might still use that recorder, but you might add the test IDs,
Okay.
but then you could have anyone use that Cypress recorder
Okay.
who's not a developer,
Okay.
and then they just send you like,
The
these
code
are all the
snippets,
interactions
yeah.
that I did, and you just paste it in now you've got a
Okay.
test.
All right.
I guess the
Okay.
question I'd have that the recorder sounds reliable. I was wondering like if you have something like a drop down menu and you say click this and then click the second item in the menu,
It works.
it works.
They'll
You-
use
you
like
add, like,
nth
more.
child.
It doesn't give you like, yeah, it gives you some long CSS selector that's like really obnoxious to like look at.
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, or does it? It doesn't.
Yeah.
Okay.
Unless you put test IDs.
Yeah, okay.
So if you stick to best practices, it still looks like clean code.
Okay.
But the point is like, you don't have to write every single test. Some of your other users could write it.
So come back to the slides for go over just a couple points on here. And this is up for debate, but it's just kind of my experience. So this is probably not actually true. I'm going to delete that. But it can be true. But if you're just testing through the front end and you're not trying to set up data in the back end, then say you're testing things on an index page, and say you want to test like pagination, like if I have 20 items in the database and I visit the index page, I want to ensure that I only see the first 10 items, not all of them. I want to ensure that I can paginate through everything. Well, if you only have access to the front end, then you have, from my understanding, you have to write a script that would go through the create form each and every time to set that up. So that's, which if you're testing like a staging or semi-production site, you want to just like ensure that, hey, this thing actually works in production. That might be, might be what you're trying to do.
So
But
like in regular like Rails testing, like you know like your before, and you set up like you create like 20 posts or whatever, so you can paginate by 10.
correct.
And then like why couldn't you just call like factory bot to create 20?
If you have access to that backend, I'm saying like if you are testing like a live staging
Oh,
site and
yeah.
you don't have
Yeah, yeah. of
direct
course.
database access.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and
Yeah.
Cypress, because it's really, all it's doing is visiting a URL that you give it.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
It doesn't, you have to kind of tell it how you want to, basically, or set up a character. We'll have to,
Yeah.
I'll do that. So that's kind of what I'm
Yeah.
pointing out here is, if you're just testing through Cypress and you don't have any data considerations, that might, depending on what you're trying to do, if you're trying to make like more of a regular integration tests experience, this might be slow, so we'll have to come up with some interfaces for that, which is what we'll do next. So Cypress allows the creation of custom commands, so these could be system commands, HTTP requests, inserting and retrieving browser cookies. There's a whole, there's docs in here for, I think it's these, yeah, so these are a list of other commands, so things like request, take a screenshot, export sessions, you can actually stub things.
Well, spy would let you intercept a function and have it do something else.
Yeah, it's cool. That reminds me of what was the testing framework that does that? Jest.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
concept and most of them.
Yeah. But yeah, we'll be utilizing some of these for custom commands. These, how you set these up will vary for your backend, so we'll focus on how to do this for Rails. So to demonstrate the issue, here is if you want this test to be reliable, we have to have some kind of consistency in our database. So right now we just signed up and signed in as the same user. We run this again, it's going to fail because we've already registered as that user under that email. This database only allows unique emails. Yes.
Question. Can you run Cypress open with like a specific test file in mind? To like directly
I
run
never
that
thought of
test?
that. I've always just clicked through here, but
I'll look it up.
I'd be interested in that because
I'll look it up.
okay. But yeah, we're going to come up with a way to make this work consistently. So the initial command I want is one called resetDB. So we'll write that and we'll watch it fail. It's not a function. So now we're going to come up with a way to reset the database. So where you make custom commands is in a file called Cypress port commands, and this is I forget the command to generate this, but it gives you some examples of things you can write. So we're going to write one, Cypress commands add resetDB. It's not going to take any arguments, so we'll just leave that empty. And then see if I memorize this. Zoom again. So this will be exec is for running system commands, and it will be Rails and test, exec. We'll do DB schema load. We're just going to clear out our tables and recreate them from the schema. So let's see if I memorized that correctly. Looks like that worked.
Did it finish immediately when the command finished, or did it wait like 8 seconds because you told it to wait 8 seconds?
No, it actually took that long.
Okay.
That's something I'll bring up at the end. There's better ways of updating, resetting the database. And actually, you probably don't want to do it between every test. You want to do it between like all your tests or
Before the
certain
sweep.
contexts. Yeah, because that is. Actually, I'll explain what's going on there. So that's essentially dropping our tables and recreating them. There's another method, which is better, is truncating tables. In Ruby, there's a library called Database Cleaner, which will do that. It will go into your database, run truncate on all of your public tables, and then that's a little more efficient. But yeah, essentially now we have it in a state where we can run this every time, and it consistently works. So Jonathan, you brought up factories before. That's the next thing we'll build. So let's imagine a scenario where we want to split up our sign up and sign in tests, so we can run sign in without having to go through the sign up step first. So I'm going to take everything from the sign in down here, copy that there. We don't need the sign out step anymore. And then I'm only going to run the reset once. And then this will just be signs up. I'm going to comment this out for now because I don't want that one to run. But if we do this, we'll watch it fail because it's going to reset the database and it's going to try to sign in as a user. It doesn't exist. So we'll watch that fail. Yeah, usually if you see like a step pane like that, it's like, okay, there's a timeout threshold you can set. In this case, it's 10 seconds. And this is just Cypress saying like, okay, there might be some promises that are still resolving. So there's a timeout threshold you can set there. So what I'd like to do is something called factory DB. I'm going to give it the name of a Rails model I want to use, which in this case is user. And then we're going to give it some attributes. So first name, test, last name, user, email, password. Okay. So watch that fail because we haven't written the command yet. Factory DB is not a function. So we'll go set that up. Just gonna copy the function head from that one. We'll name this one factory DB. Move zoom again. So we're going to take a couple arguments here. We're going to take one called table, one called attributes, and I'm going to actually copy the example I have. I already wrote this beforehand just to make this faster. So we're going to get the attributes as JSON or a JavaScript object. We're just going to send them over to Ruby, so we're going to serialize them as JSON first. And then I created a rake task that will handle our inserting. So I'm just setting some environment variables here, model and attributes, calling this. And I'll just go
Interesting.
up over to
You could use the Rails runner,
Rails
Yeah,
runner.
Rails runner. Yeah,
just
we'll do it.
execute the commands and.
That way you can
the
just pass in
console.
Ruby code directly from JavaScript.
How does that work?
So if you do Rails runner and then you pass in like a string into like standard output, actually I think if you do Rails runner and then the hyphen, and then you pass like your Ruby code into standard input, it'll run it.
So it's so essentially the same as opening up a console.
Yeah, it's exactly
You
the
could
same.
just
Yeah.
give it the string of
Yeah.
factory bot or whatever.
Rather than like having to like encode and decode, you can just give it straight Ruby code.
Yeah, that's essentially what we're
Yeah.
doing here.
Yeah.
But yeah, in this case, I
Yeah, no, this is good too.
made a rake task called Cypress insert. So yeah, just decodes the JSON, gets the model, and runs create, and then we're printing the resulting record back out to standard out, so we can use that later and later tests. Anyway, this should work.
Was that Rails code you were just showing?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So what we did was we took
Or
the
Ruby code.
Ruby code.
Yeah.
Running code for Rails. I just made a JavaScript object of attributes for my record and serialized them and sent them over to Ruby. And so now we're able to make records. But yeah, I show it this way because you might have a factory function, and if you're doing Rails, you might be using factory bot or some other factory mechanism, so you might want to use that, or you might be using Express.js, and maybe you have like CRUD APIs for everything, in which case you just call the APIs. But point being, you can, depending on your app and what tools you have, you can set up your own factory mechanism for Cypress.
Yeah, it seems like more generic, like potentially non-Rails solutions could use this.
Oh yeah, Cypress is not meant for Rails, it's just a JavaScript.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's authentication. So once we've covered resetting the database, creating a factory function for creating records. Now let's create something behind authentication. So I'm going to make a Cypress, make a new test file. Call it post. And yeah, you name your test files like .cy and .js. So I'm going to just copy some of this here. Call this posts. We'll reset for all tests, and then I'm just gonna call this index. We'll try to visit the index page for our posts. So we'll just try that first and watch that fail. So on our post here. Oh, and by the way, I don't know if it's obvious, but whenever we're editing files and you save them, it generally tries to rerun them. So like if I made a change here, like I just added some white space, it's gonna try to rerun it. Now it looked like this actually passed. No, it didn't. Oh, well, it didn't error, but that's because I didn't have an assertion. So like, let's see if I can copy one of the assertions here.
Spec does. Same thing our spec does.
What's that?
Same thing our spec does. You put a no expectation in there.
Yeah,
just
there's
like
no assertions in it. Just
Yeah, I
just
think you
passes.
can do like it'll fail if you don't do it like an assertion. I think that's
You can make that.
Yeah.
I've seen some
at
frameworks.
least in our spec. I don't
If
know.
you hit a 400 in the browser, like a 404, it would fail.
Yeah,
Uh,
but it doesn't matter for this. But yeah.
I've seen some frameworks where you can, if there are asynchronous processes in your code, you can tell it, I'm expecting this number of assertions to run.
Yeah.
So if you have like a function that's going to run asynchronously and also have assertions of its own, I think it's common in Java.
I wrote some code in Cypress that would listen for console errors, and it would fail the test on the console errors, but it wouldn't do it by default. So you'd have to add
Yeah, so
some
like
custom
mark it
code.
as like this test will fail on console.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like before each, like add this wiring to listen for anything that's a console error.
I mean, you could just like override console error and just cause it to fail if you call it, you know.
Right.
So yeah, so we tried visiting posts. We can't because we're not signed in. So let's handle.
Ryan, is that reset DB that you're over right now? Is that a JavaScript code, or are you calling Ruby code again?
This is JavaScript code that's reaching out to Ruby code. So it's this function right here that I created.
Oh,
So
okay.
I want to do a Cypress JavaScript function, but then I'm saying run a system command, which is just running this Rails command.
I got you. I totally missed that before. I saw the one below it, but I didn't see the reset DB. I got it. Thanks.
Are there any kind of exec commands that you found that don't work?
Exec
Like
commands
we'll-
that don't work.
Like will not get the exit code?
Yes. So if your command doesn't return an exit code, then this will hang. So I also experimented with this project in a React and Express app, and I wrote a JavaScript like system script that would do something similar to this, reset the database, but I found that script didn't return an exit code. Like I had to explicitly give it exit code 0 or exit code 1. Trying to remember if I have that. I might actually have that.
Did that work after you returned it?
Yeah,
as
it
code?
did. I'm gonna see like I'll look real quick to see if I have it. I had like a JS post version of this, and it would have been under server, and it would have been this connects truncate, I think. Yeah. So here we go. So I had to.
Oh,
I wrote my own truncate script for this, and at the end, I'm doing process exit 0. I found that if your command doesn't give an exit code, then Cypress will think it's still running. So another thing worth pointing out is you can't, I'm not gonna say, well, for the most part, you can't run servers from within Cypress because, so like say part of your setup is, let's start the Rails server up, right? So you'll notice back in our example here, like I started up the server independent of Cypress, and that's because if you try to start it as a command, for one, you can't do it asynchronously, and two, running your server is not going to return an exit code, so Cypress won't know to continue. So if I try running bundle exec Rails server and a Cypress command, then it would.
Yeah, you'd have to set up some like complex IPC whatever things so it's like the server's ready to run.
Yeah, I even tried starting a server that I forget what the term is.
Yeah.
Put it in like a separate daemon process.
Job.
Like a separate job, right? And I felt like even that didn't return the code that like an exit code that I expect. So, and they actually have things in their docs like saying, hey, don't run a web server, don't start a web server through Cypress, start that independently. So that's what I've done here. Good questions. So, other ordinarily for creating, what we're going to do with authentication, creating user authenticating, that's something you'll probably want to do like pretty high level if you don't want to be authenticating before each test. But we'll make a function here, reset DB, and then we're going to create a user. We'll just copy this code over, and then there's two versions of, I don't know how to say two, there's different ways of doing login, but I'm going to do a login where you just pass in the email and password, like so. So you can do that, or if you want to kind of take the attributes from this, you can actually chain commands together like so, and that way whatever's the output of the first command gets passed into the second command.
Is that cy.login another one of your database?
Yeah, we're about to create that. Understand, like
Okay.
these commands that you make, you can chain them together. Yeah.
That's cool.
So
you could do like cy reset db dot factory db.
if I wanted to, yeah.
Okay.
So let's see, how do I want to do this? Let's do the one where we're chained. So I can write this a couple different ways. So because we're chaining it, we're going to use something called create subject true. And that's saying that whenever you run this, it has to be linked with another command. And so we'll get an attribute back called, well, we'll call it subject, but we're really just getting an argument there. And then I'll just copy, I don't know how I do this. I'm gonna copy the fast one, which is, I'll explain this one in a minute. But there's two things we can do for login. We can either make something that through the backend just forcibly signs in the user, or we can go through our actual sign-in flow. So you can, say, hey, given my credentials, just run through the sign-in as a user. So both of these approaches will work. So you can interact with the page through a command as well. But in this case, this is just a little bit faster. I'm not going to say it's much faster. There's a couple things I wanted to do here. So one, it just forcibly creates a session. In this case, I have a Rails controller called Cypress controller. It just through device, which I'm using for authentication, it just signs in the user, doesn't ask for a password or anything, skips all that password verification. And then I'm also setting a cookie for the current user ID. In this case, I'm doing it because the post records I'm going to want to create later require a user ID, and I can go through the process of creating secondary users, but this is just a little bit faster. It saves a few database inserts. So doing that, so we'll create our login. So to cover resetting the database, creating a user, and then logging in, and then let's see if this takes. Yeah. So you can watch what it did too. So you can see, okay, here we're setting a cookie, here we're calling requests, and then we're on our post page. So those are the three useful functions that I've created here that I've seen implemented in other packages. We'll review the Cypress on Rails package shortly. Before I do that, I'm going to show a fully fleshed out posts test.
Let's go.
So here we're actually visiting the index, and well beforehand we're creating a post record using the current user ID.
Nice.
And then show one is a little more complex because I'm going to have comments on this page. So I'm creating an array of comments and then creating a post. And then once I have the post data, so these are all promises, right? So you create a record, and then when you get that data back, parse it, and then for each of those, or with that post, iterate through all the comments and create all the comments. And then this page, I'm actually visiting root path, and then through the navigation menu to test navigation, go through that way, and then assert that the content is there.
So like those test IDs that you do, like if you went to your HTML, like they're just in there.
So you can actually inspect through Cypress too. So like
And you just put those in there manually.
yeah, I didn't do it for all of them.
Yeah, just the ones you test, obviously.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not showing it in here.
No, I believe you if you tell me that.
Yeah, there they are.
I was just curious.
So Cypress is quite robust in some of the input actions you can do. This example is pretty straightforward, but the cool one is I wrote a test for deleting, which is going to the index page, clicking the delete button, which brings up a confirmation dialog, so you can tell it how to respond to confirmation dialogues too. And I've worked with tests that have like complex file upload things where you click a button, you select a file, you upload it, or even like drag and drop. You can tell it how, like, you're kind of faking it, you're using like fixture files you have in the test, but you can tell it like, hey, I want to upload these files and watch what happens when I upload files. So we'll run this. This is another post too. So now that we have our commands, all this should work. I did write this to reset the database between each test, and you'll see it.
Takes a long time.
Yeah, it does take a long time. I noticed that the other day when I was putting this together, I'm like, man, this takes a while. It has to do with.
I bet you could, like, if you set up like a Rails runner script and you just made like a simple REPL, kind of like the way like LSPs work, you could probably like have like your Rails server and then like a Rails runner process running, and then if you write to standard in, it'll just run that code, and then that way you don't have to like keep rebooting Rails, you know, like kind of like how Spring does.
Just keep Rails running, and then
Yeah, you have like a
leave your
Rails
section.
runner instance, and you
Yeah.
just have like a live console. You just write Ruby code, and then it'll just run immediately.
I mean, your slowness is coming out because you're
Yeah.
shelling out.
Yeah.
Every time you run rake, you're
Yeah.
rebooting Rails.
Yeah.
It's like how
so
you're
have,
kind
like,
of talking how you can Rails-C
yeah, like
and
if,
send it
if
directly.
if you write a Ruby script that basically reads from standard in, you can run that script, and then from Cypress you can like just write to that process ID's standard in, and then it'll just run the code without rebooting Rails.
You basically you pipe it into the same
Yeah.
shell.
So you basically make like a REPL that has no like.
All you're doing is typing in
Yeah.
that REPL.
Yeah, and then that way you're not rebooting Rails, because rebooting Rails takes forever.
I didn't think about that. I was
Yeah.
thinking about the database aspect of this, but yeah,
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. We're
Yeah.
restarting
That'll
Rails every
make it
time
so
you're
fast.
going through rake.
Yeah, totally.
So,
And you already have Rails
Yeah.
running.
well, I have Rails running, but that's the,
No, it would be a secondary process in addition to Rails running.
so what's happening here is I have Rails running on a server for, when I'm visiting it, but each time I run those commands, it's creating yet another Rails process.
Yeah. But you could just reuse the same one.
Yeah, you can
Because
just send
you-
it directly into that.
All your database connections and all that stuff is
That's
like the
already
same. Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
So, all right, let's
So
see.
you gotta give a follow-up talk.
Yeah, well, I'm learning about Rails runners.
Yeah.
Okay, so next we'll talk about Cypress on Rails. This is a library that does most of what we just saw. It uses FactoryBot. So if this is pretty common if you're building Rails apps, you use FactoryBot to create records, because you can use it to create defaults for things like you're creating users, like, okay, auto-populate first name and last name, auto-generate an email. So it saves some time there. They connected FactoryBot with their own internal API. I think they make some controllers that or maybe they're using Rails runners. I didn't look into this.
Do you prefer doing it this way or the way you showed?
I'm on the fence about that. I have a project that's using this. One of the things I was going to talk about with this is it utilizes both the dev and test environments simultaneously, which has a few odd side effects. So you run your server in the dev environment, but you configure your database config to read an environment variable, and if that environment variable is set for Cypress, then you point to the test database. I don't know why you just don't just use the test environment, but that's how they say to do it in the docs. But they kind of provide everything that I'm looking for. Like they have the functions that I just wrote. So I think there's potentially some optimizations of writing your own and comparing that, because maybe especially if you're not using FactoryBot, that's kind of a deal breaker for this. But even if you are, it's kind of an older library, so maybe there's some things that you're not using, and when you install it, it generates a ton of files, like a ton of example files and a ton of controller endpoints, and so I mean, if you don't mind having a lot of files and add it to your project, that's fine. But let's go to here, and then let's create a branch for Cypress. Kind of reset here. So here your tests live in the E2E directory, so they have their own Cypress project. Didn't look at the config much, but the config file is where you set some defaults, namely how to, what's your default endpoint. So like, if I saw it in our test, we were just visiting relative paths, weren't putting in the full domain each time. That's because that's set here. You can set your default timeout. So saw all of our tests, if they've failed, they took like 10 seconds to fail, so you can shorten that if you want. And then our support file, which is I think this is ultimately how you get to what's that file called? Cypress support index. Yes, this is where you can import your commands. And they have one called on Rails. Yeah, this is where they this is where they did create they did create like an API for everything, so they did create this E2E command, and this is where I think they're sending all of their like FactoryBot and everything to. Yeah, so they create a lot of things. I actually still had to create my login, but like the only thing I had to create. is kind of similar. Trying to think of anything that's different that's worth mentioning. The gem file. So I mentioned this requires factory bot. It also requires database cleaner. I'm thinking it might be, I forget if you have to use database cleaner specifically or if you can use, let's look at their page real quick actually. Cypress on Rails. Yeah, so here's the GitHub for the gem. Quite lengthy, but so if you're using this, you install Cypress through this. Like they have generator commands for setting up this version of Cypress, and you can tell it like, hey, where do you want the install to go? You can tell it if you're using. Actually, you have to tell it if you're using npm. I think it defaults to yarn. It's odd.
Yeah.
And here's where you have to tell it which database to use. So they want to use the development Rails environment, but if you're running Cypress, you want to use the test database. Yeah.
Weird why they won't use Rails N.
What's that?
They should just use Rails N.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's
how they do it. That's fine.
But yeah, when you start it, you give it the Cypress 1 variable, and then you run it on port 5017. And then here's their example. So they have this app factories command, and you tell it the action you want to do. So with factory bot, you can either create or build. So create will write it to the database, build will just return an instance. You can also do create list, but you can create you can give it a whole list of different things you want to create all in one go, and then return of that is an array of all the things. So here you just create one record, and then that record will contain
all the IDs.
Yeah.
How do you handle all of the every time I've ever done Selenium or any this type of testing, it's always been flaky, basically. So I do the answer to that.
What's the general reason for the flakiness that you're describing?
I don't know. It's just if you do a complex workflow, it'll just fail. And if you rerun it, it'll pass. So it'll have some percentage chance of failure. So
I've
there
seen
has to
something
be
like
something
that.
that does for that. Is it auto retry? What does it do?
I've seen something like that for take a screenshot and then compare the
Yeah.
screenshot to the previous screenshot, but he hasn't done that in this one.
I haven't used Cypress.
So that
someone
one-
who hasn't used Cypress at all, if I have a 20-step workflow process, for example, and let's say if I run it 100,000 times, I'll eventually find out that there's a 7% chance that it fails on step 15.
Yeah.
What does that look like?
So the stuff he's shown so far will never be flaky. It'll always work.
It always works.
But if you do something like Cypress has a
I have
snapshot,
I have a hard time believing you. only
Cypress
because
has a snapshot plugin that you could use, for example, and then it takes a threshold value, and that's super flaky. Yeah. But
I've
the stuff
seen-
he's done.
So I've used Rails with Capybara, which is Selenium based, I think, and I did encounter a lot of flakiness there.
Yeah.
It's been a long time since I've used it, so
Me too.
I'm thinking of trying to really think from memory here, but there were two types of flakiness that were common. One was had to do with asynchronous processes. So something was calling an API call. There's a lot. There are JavaScript API interactions. Those could sometimes flake because something's taking too long. The more common thing I've run into is time-based flakes, which you can get that in unit tests too.
Yeah, but it's way more common if you do a whole browser implementation.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, like a network timeout?
I was at a place where like we had pages that would query like a list of things based off of the current date. Well, run it at 8 o'clock at night, and you have UTC based timestamps, and then
Yeah.
that was common, but
Because it takes into account so much more like of the environment that like it's gonna flake more.
yeah, I would just if you are able to make things with factories, I would try to like make the data as static as possible. Yeah, especially if you're doing stuff
So
with
like
time
fixtures.
Yep. And as I showed earlier, you can adjust the timeouts. So like if you do have like asynchronous processes that just they take a while.
I think you can tell the request as well to retry a
Probably
number of
could, yeah.
times. Yeah.
Yeah, like with our spec, if I ever were to do like integration tests like this, like which I haven't done in a while, I would just like have like I would like configure our spec to like store the results of it, like the R spec results or whatever, and I'll have like only failures, R spec dash dash only failures, and like you rerun it like 3 times, just so that way it like runs enough times that like all the flakes like actually pass, like or whatever, like.
Yeah, I was on an app once that like for the RSpec unit tests,
Yeah.
they didn't care. They just had a retry. So like they had like a 4 times retry.
Yeah, like that's what I'm talking about. Like you just retry it enough. That way, like if your CI says that it passed, like you could actually feel confident that it actually passed. And just retry it as many times as you need to like it's like has a 90% likelihood of passing or whatever. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So let's see that they have app factories, and then they have app clean. Yeah, here's what I was looking for. Use database cleaner. So you do require database cleaner. And actually, they even tell you you can customize it. So they have like app commands. Clean. Yeah, so here they're just using the database cleaner, but they actually give you the file so you can write your own. So that's cool. Yeah, we'll just run this real quick. So that's going to be in. Actually, I don't have to navigate in there. I can just do npx Cypress open project E2E, and then we're going to run the Rails service, right? Give it. Rails Cypress 1, Rails service 5017.
It just uses a default browser?
You still select the browser you want.
Oh.
Let's do Chrome this time.
You did project E2E, but it still prompted you whether you wanted to do E2E or not.
That is just I'm just telling you what folder I want to read Cypress from.
Alright, yeah, it's like a sub.
Yeah, like where your Cypress project is.
So these are actually like all you get these when you install Cypress on Rails. A lot of them are just like examples, and you can probably delete those in a real project.
Yeah, I think I would just do like a Rails runner with a like it just runs whatever, like evals whatever string you give it, and then you can just that way you can call like your regular factory bots
Yeah.
and everything. That totally
Is it doing build up and tear down commands for each test?
For each test, I believe so. I believe
So
it
you see, it was
that
much
fast.
faster than yours.
But it was because it was using the database cleaner with the truncated. Maybe it was using the Rails runner, so I didn't look at that code too much. But when I look at the test, actually no, I put it up at no, it is before each. It's running. It's clean, wiping out the database every time. So that was fast to watch that again. That looked at 13 seconds. And so like just within a second each. Yeah.
Cool.
Let's see. I think I had some notes for considerations for this, but pretty much we've already talked about it. So use the dev and test environment, which could be weird. It's specific for Rails and requires factory bot, and if you're not using Rails and FactoryBot, then it's hard to find similar solutions. I'm sure they're out there. I tried searching around, but I didn't see, couldn't find anything offhand that was similar. But takeaway is it's good to understand how Cypress works and the different commands and strategies you can use for inserting data with factories, whether you're using Rails or React, Express, Elixir, Phoenix. You can set this up with any app. That's all I got. As usual, I'll share the slides and the recording later. If you're in the Jax text Slack, it'll be in there, and the recording will go up on YouTube. So, thank you.
Bravo. John, you got any questions?
He answered the question I had earlier.
All right.
Well, you did remind me of something though. I need to go back and look at because I'm gonna prepare a talk on testing also, but for something else. Is that database cleaner? I want to see if I can implement that because right now I'm manually doing my DB cleanup for my tests.
Cool.
I forgot about that database cleaner gem. I need to see if it'll work in my environment.
Yeah.
In Rails?
No, I'm gonna be doing a talk on doing testing for PL SQL, but I'm gonna use Ruby as an example of how to test. So that's where the database cleaner might work. And then I'm also going to be talking about this other framework that's built specific for PL SQL and kind of do like a comparison.
John, you going to ElixirConf?
No,
I'm going to stop the recording.
You
sure.
going?